Are there biblical exceptions for having an abortion? Are you ready to face the truth? Face the Truth is the weekly podcast from the Truth Church of Olathe, Kansas, with our pastor and Bible teacher, Bishop Gregory Riggin. Thank you to everyone who is listening. I trust that today's episode will be a blessing to all those who tune in. In our modern time, rape, incest, and preserving the life of the mother and or the child have become debated exceptions for justifying abortions. Because this is such a controversial topic, the church needs to take guidance from the Bible now more than ever. The Bible draws very clear lines regarding sin. What does it say about this supposed gray area? Bishop, in the last episode, you presented the biblical position on abortion. Are there any exceptions where abortion is acceptable? For example, rape or incest?
Well, as everyone knows, these are the exceptions that are always given, especially by politicians who want to please the pro-life crowd but don't want to be seen as extremists. So they will tell you that, we need to allow for rape, incest, and they usually throw in the life of the mother. Now, I will tell you right now that I see that third one as something totally different. I see that as a separate issue from the first two, and I'll explain that in a moment. But to claim that we need abortion for rape and incest, there are some things that we need to recognize. First of all, this comes from the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is probably the most cited policy institute on the subject of abortion. A lot of people don't realize that they are basically an arm of Planned Parenthood. They exist through Planned Parenthood. A lot of people don't know that connection is there, but it is. But because of that, you can expect that the numbers that the Guttmacher Institute gives are going to be, to the best of their ability, numbers that would favor abortion.
Sure.
And yet they said that only 1% of women obtain an abortion because they've been raped. 1% of all the abortions. Less than half of 1% are because of incest. So that's not the real reason they're pushing abortion. It's not about rape and incest. They're pushing abortion, as I said before, for their own convenience, for their own pleasure, because they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. That's why they want abortion, not because of people that are raped or because of girls that have had to endure some incestuous attack. Having said that, for that 1%, or that 1.5%, if you put the two together for rape and incest, can we really justify the taking of the child's life because of the sin of the father? The scripture is very clear that nobody's to pay for the sins of their father.
Right.
So again, if we're going to take a biblical stance on this subject, we cannot give an exception for rape and incest where we are giving the death penalty to the child because the father or mother, depending on what's going on here, but because of one of the parents' sin. We cannot blame the child and take the child's life. When I talked about God's system of judgment, where he instituted a death penalty for those who brought about death, we've got to understand that death penalty certainly does not apply to the innocent party. And that child that is formed as a result of rape and incest is still a child. It's still an innocent life. It did nothing except begin to live. Why should the child pay for the sin of the rapist? Why should the child pay for the sin of the one committing the incest? This in no way lines up with anything that the Scripture teaches. We are responsible for our own sin. End of discussion. But that child that's formed had nothing to do with the fact that it was formed.
Right.
And to take its life is to put judgment on the innocent. That would be like imprisoning someone who had things stolen from them. You're the victim in this situation.
Right.
Why are you getting the punishment? The child that's formed through rape and incest is the victim here. Why punish the victim? Why destroy the life of the victim? Now, I know that there are those listening who say, well, yeah, but the lady is the victim. Yes, she is. If she's been raped, some relative has taken advantage of her, yes, she's a victim in that. I understand that. But so is the child. And again, if this child were a part of her body, that would be one thing, but it's not. It's a life all its own. And so we now have two lives we have to consider, both of whom are victims. Now again, only 1.5% of all pregnancies that are terminated because of this. So we're dealing with a very, very small number. This is really not the issue. And so we cannot, to answer your question, we cannot justify an exception for rape and incest. Biblically, we can't justify it. Now, the life of the mother, as I said, this is something altogether different. And I see this as something different because, again, let's go back to what I said when I talked about thou shalt not kill. In the original is you shall do no murder. And I gave the example at that point that there were times that God told the Jews to go and kill others. One example that comes to mind is when God said to King Saul, I want you to kill all the Amalekites. That's only one of many examples. And when Saul spared King Agag, the prophet Samuel personally put Agag to death. But he was not in violation of God's commandment, because the death of Agag was God's judgment upon that people for what they had done to the people of Israel earlier. God was judging Agag. So this was not the taking of an innocent life. All right? God did not only condone, but command taking life in certain circumstances. And those circumstances involved when people were taking another life. Now, this gets into a topic that becomes ancillary. Should Christians carry weapons? Should we be armed? Is it right for us to ever take a life? You know, there was a time when every Christian who was drafted would go in as a conscientious objector.
Right.
Saying, we will not carry a weapon. We will not take another life. That's evolved. That's changed. Part of it because people have come to understand that there is a difference between the taking of innocent life and retribution, or the sparing of life. I don't believe that taking the life, as I've said, of a murderer is a sin. He's being judged for having taken another life. So let's now take that murderer, let's say before he is allowed to take another life, you walk into your home and he's got a knife in his hand and it's to your wife's throat, whatever. Are you committing murder to take his life? I don't think so. I believe you're sparing the innocent life when you take the guilty life. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
God cares about life. God cares about human life. And God wants us to defend human life. And so this man's about to take the life of another. You take his. Spare the innocent. I don't believe you have violated God's command.
So the rule is, like in the Old Testament, where God is commanding the Israelites to go and pursue the Jebusites and the Canaanites and all those others that are in the Promised Land, there are instances where they have taken other lives, and this is retribution. This is God's judgment upon them.
In fact, many of them were involved in a form of worship whereby they were taking the lives of their children. They were offering their children's lives to their gods, which again, to me, is just another example of how God feels about the life of children, including the unborn. But yes, God would have those people put to death for previous deaths they caused, innocent lives they'd taken. And even, you might say, because God knew that the Jewish people would not be able to live in peace among them, and those heathen nations would come take the lives of his people.
Well, that wouldn't be, in that case, if it was for the case of future.
But they're sparing innocent life because God knows the future. We don't. We can't sit and say, okay, I think this guy's going to kill someone, but God does. And so if God speaks and says, go and take their life, he doesn't make a mistake. God declared the end from the beginning. All right. Now, I'm just throwing that out as an example. It's one thing that perhaps would be something that God might have taken into consideration. I think that there's enough historical evidence of their human sacrifice and other things to show that they were already guilty of what was considered murder.
Right.
But I'm saying that it could also be that God knew if they were allowed to live, they would end up taking the lives of his people. And God was sparing innocent life in taking theirs. That's just conjecture on my part, you understand?
Sure.
To give an example of why God would condone taking a life. So to get it back into the realm of this murderer that you find about to take the life of your wife or a family member, I do not believe you're committing murder to kill the murderer. You see very clearly an innocent life is at stake. Okay. So let's now take that, because the question at hand is the life of the mother. Very, very few. In fact, the statistic, you gave a statistic in a conversation you had, a text message you had, of how many women's lives are actually at stake because of a pregnancy. Can you find that statistic for us real quick? And I think that came from the Guttmacher Institute as well.
Well, it was originally posted on the CDC's website.
CDC, okay.
But often they do reference the Guttmacher's Institute.
Even the CDC. We're not talking
CDC
about
does.
we're not talking about getting this from Focus on the Family or some pro-life organization.
Yeah. the number of women who die from giving birth is 0.0001445% of women who actually have died from giving birth.
Because of birth. What we found in trying, and I tried to look for some kind of a number that would indicate how many actual abortions take place as a result of the woman's life being at stake. And the fact of the matter is, it is such a small number. It's well below 1% of all abortions that are taking place. It is such an extremely rare situation where a woman's life is at stake and an abortion would save her life. Such a rare thing that happens. But when that does happen, there are those tubal pregnancies, for example, that if allowed to continue, both mother and child will die. So here you've got a situation where you've got to make a choice. Is one life more important than the other? Well, no, not if you're going to look at it that way. However, there is another way to look at it, and a lot of people will disagree with this perspective. But there's another way to look at this, and that is that now all of a sudden this innocent life, this child, is threatening the life of its mother. And so because the child now becomes the potential killer, there are many who would say taking the life of the child to spare the life of the mother would not be murder. Because the child is threatening the mother's life. And in the same way that we would take down a murderer to save our wife, this child is about to become a murderer, a suicide murderer.
Right. I never thought of it that way. I've never heard that position presented.
That's one way to look at it. All right. And that's why I say I think it's different than rape and incest. Because with rape and incest, that child has no part in what's going on other than the fact that it exists. In the situation with the mother's health, the child is playing a part. But again, that's a very rare circumstance.
Statistically speaking, there are those in our listenership that have been impacted by abortion. Please join us on the next episode of Face the Truth to hear about the hope that lies before you. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for today's podcast. We want you to know that we are here to help you in any way we can. If there is anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Send your prayer requests to prayer@olathetruth.com. That's prayer@olathetruth.com. If you live in the Kansas City metropolitan area, we invite you to join us for our services this week. Sunday morning at 10, Sunday evening at 6, and Tuesday evening at 7:30. For those who cannot attend, we will provide a live stream on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and our website, olathetruth.com/live. Until our next podcast, take care and God bless.